Good morning, everybody. This is Matt Filer with Hardenbergh Insurance Group. I'm here with John Baldino from Humareso. We're going to get started here. Welcome to the HIG Academy webinar, Proactive Hiring Practices. Any questions that you have, please put in the chat box if you have it, or John will answer your questions at the end. So without further ado, we'll get started, and I'll turn the reins over to John.
Thanks, Matt. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me here, Hardenbergh. Appreciate being a part of the HIG Academy. As you see, we're going to talk about proactive hiring practices this morning, and really the consideration around this is the difference between reactive versus proactive. A lot of hiring that's done in our organizations, the highest percentage is really responsive. Hey, there's someone resigned, and so we need to hurry up and fill that position quickly. Someone is given 2 weeks notice, maybe they just decide they're leaving today and that's it. But how can we be a bit more proactive about it? And so that's a little bit of what we're going to look at in light of some of the current statistics. And I'm going to advance this, I think, this way because let's see if I can make this work now. Nope. Hey, there we go. Okay, so right now we have 3 considerations, and you see that I have the war for talent there. I'm not a big believer in the kind of this concept of war. I think it's a bit too violent, not because I'm anti-war in that sense, but rather we don't want to look at it as if there is sort of battle lines, one side over the other. We would rather have that be something where we're considering talent. How do we get the best talent rather than having it be sort of adversarial? One statistic that we need to pay attention to is the quit rate right now, which is at the highest it's been in 15 years. So again, the quit rate really is at the highest it's been, which is 2.3%, which means out of every 100 people, 2.3 are voluntarily leaving their jobs. And I know that may not seem like a very high number, but it's again, the highest it's been. We started measuring this in 2000. So in the last 15 years, this is the highest it's been. And it's been consistently that for about 10 or 11 months at this point. And so what does that tell you? It tells you that people are pretty confident that they're going to land somewhere else. The demand for skilled folks is high. And so those who are sitting in a position, particularly those more skilled, they're going to be able to sort of write their own ticket. And so that's something that we have to be thoughtful of when we consider how we are proactive. Every employer is thinking the same thing, this catch and catch. We're trying to catch the right folks, bring them into our organizations, and then keep them on the line, keep them caught. How do you do that, right? This concept, the concepts of employee engagement, the way in which we're approaching compensation, the variety of benefits that we're trying to offer, those work-life balance, work-life integration considerations, flexible staffing, working from home, all of those considerations really have been done and put into place as a result of employers trying to think about how do I keep that employee on the line? How do I keep him, her, or they engaged? And so because of that, we've got to be a bit more thoughtful proactively about how we are going to do this. So step 1, quite honestly, from a proactive standpoint, is up to the employer and the reputation of the organization. The employer brand, probably more than it's ever been, is extremely important to pay attention to. What do outsiders think of your company? What is it that they are hearing on the streets, so to speak? And so what do the streets look like? Yes, you've got to pay attention to your online forums, places like Glassdoor. For some of you, even the customer reviews in Yelp and the like are important because they do speak to your employer brand. I know even in the work that I get to do, running a consulting firm, in the recruitment vein of what we provide, we're hearing from candidates who are saying, hey, I was interested in the role, but I went online and did a little bit of research and I read some things that make me think this may not be the kind of organization that values certain things the same way I do, and so I'd like to remove myself from consideration. Personally, I've been in HR-related work for 28 years. The last couple of years, responses like that from candidates are the most I've ever heard, where they are emboldened to self-select out of a process. They may not even apply. You won't even know that they were a viable candidate because it doesn't get to an active response to any ad that you may have up because they're doing the research before even application. And so there's a drop-off of those skilled laborers coming into your employment because of the brand that's out there. So why do they think that? Take a look at your internal structures. How is the organization itself put together? Are there responses happening from your employees? Forget about it just being online. Are you asking your folks in-house, what do you think of the company? Why do you think that of our company? How can we promote that? Maybe you start to do some things with your current staff and post them on your own website. Share it as part of your careers page on the site. Testimonials of folks who are talking about what it's like to work there. You need to prep for the hiring. Again, being proactive. Have people share stories. Have customers talk about the level of engagement that they've had with various members of the staff. It isn't going to be enough to just write a response to every Glassdoor post. That's not enough. If that's your only strategy, it needs to be more expansive. You've got to improve that brand more. Put yourself in the limelight. Can you be supportive of charities? Can you be supportive of other community service organizations that are aligned to the values that you have? Can you be more, again, proactive in image? How are you taking advantage of your marketing department? Those folks ought to be keepers of some great consideration around what communication strategies should be like around your employer brand. If they're not prepared for that, I'm not saying to fire those folks, but I am saying get them some help. Maybe bring in some contractors or consultants that can speak to these kinds of initiatives on a project basis until the organization gets up to speed. Because your brand, it matters. And once your brand is out there, and if it's out there in a negative way, it's a lot of legwork to correct it. Bring it back to a place where it is worthy of folks to consider working there. That's prep work. This brand has to be dealt with before these other factors of success will make sense. And we're going to walk through these three areas of expectations, sourcing, and interviewing. But I want to emphasize just again, the employer brand is something that is crucial. Think about it as an individual representation, right? What does my reputation say about me to others? It is the same thing for an organization. There are times in which a C-suite executive may have a stellar reputation, but work for an organization that is not so stellar. And if there isn't an intentionality for that messaging to say, hey, we know we've made some mistakes as an organization, and that's why we've brought in the level of talent that we've brought in. We're in the process of correcting. Here are the steps that we're taking to do so. The transparency that is associated with that will be of appeal to candidates down the road as you are doing the hiring that you will need to do. So what are we talking about in these three areas as factors for success in expectations, sourcing, and interviewing? Well, let's talk with expectations, about expectations first. Simply start with need first. What does this role need to be able to do, produce, support, or offer? What I am trying to encourage you to think about is before there is a gap, look at the role itself. Even if the roles, and especially if the roles are currently filled with people doing the work. Okay, for such and such a job, what is it this role needs to be able to do? That has to be something you identify, all of those bullet points, identify ahead of there being an opening. And the reason I say that is because quite often what we wind up doing is defining the role based on the person doing it rather than the role itself. We rely a bit too much on someone's personality, skill sets that the person has that may be beyond what the role requires. And so we've had the privilege of taking advantage of it for a period of time. And so when we look at customer service, for example, we envisioned this one person, Joanne or Mike, and we associate that's what this role is. This role is Joanne. Well, quite honestly, if Joanne leaves, what does that mean for everyone else? And what does it mean for the person coming in? Are we holding on to unrealistic considerations and not coming back to center? The needs that the role is handling have to be looked at first and identify it ahead of time. Certainly there's a want component to it as well. What would you want to see the role be able to do? But that's always in addition to what it needs to do. If you have vision for, we're going to really expand this department, we're going to wind up leveling this department, we're moving people up, we're going to be able to add certain responsibilities because of the types of people we're able to attract, that's fantastic. But you always want to know that these are wants, not needs for today. And again, the reason I say that is, think about your hiring managers. Sometimes your hiring managers don't have very much expertise in hiring folks. They are now in a position to be able to have responsibility for that, but maybe they've not done it a ton. Maybe they haven't received much training. And so they start to meet with folks from a candidate standpoint, and they are wowed by things that people can do. And they begin to change what it is that they think they need and start to look for what they want. Those of you who are in HR who are on this call, you've had those hiring managers come running to you after an interview and say, we've got to get this person. They also know how to do A, B, and C. And all of a sudden, A, B, and C become the shiny quarter that distracts you from the basic needs of the role. Sometimes that leads to us hiring people for the wrong role. They're beyond what we really need. And so we're trying to put them into this role that we have because that's what we need, even though they have a lot of things that we want. Is that fair? Obviously not, right? Is it fair? Obviously not. But what we want to be able to do is say, it's okay for us to have wants. Let's be thoughtful about it. Let's plan accordingly for that. And so by doing so, we prepare ourselves for reminding what we need and getting to what we want and knowing that we have some people who can do it. Once you have clarity there, that's when you need to cement it. Document those wants and needs in the job description. That's where you get into like preferred, would be nice to, but it's not a have to. That job description should be clear. And it's time for an update on some of the roles that you have in your organization. I would give you sort of a best practice. Annually, you should be looking at all your job descriptions, annually. Because you want to make sure the expectations you have for the role are still valid. Have there been market changes, technology changes, needs in the organization that have evolved in the last 12 months that are causing this role to be different? Update that job description. Also proactively, you should have connected to each role a scorecard that managers and those involved in the interviewing process can use to keep track of the candidates coming in. How are we scoring folks for areas of skill, qualifications and aptitudes, knowledge that they're bringing to the table, all of those areas? How do we score that? Decide ahead of time. You, if you are involved with the creation of that, do that ahead of time with those who are to be involved in the hiring process for each role so that the scorecard is agreed upon and you're not shooting from the hip. Another thought here to cement as well for certain roles is what kind of assessments would we use for measurement? How do we know that someone is really good at the things that they say they're good at? Look, people lie on resumes. Not that long ago, we had a candidate for a role that we were filling who listed the master's degree that he had in a specific area that was of appeal and was really necessary. It was a need, really necessary for this particular role. And we do more than just employment checks, we do education checks as well. And believe it or not, in that education check, it's not only was it that the person didn't have the master's as listed, the school that it was connected to never even had a history of the person applying. So you've got to be thoughtful that these assessments, whether it be checks, background checks, those kinds of things, but also assessment for capability in place. What does it mean for someone to be an accounts receivable person in the accounting department? How do you test for that? Could we create some sort of test if we don't find one already ready-made to give to everyone so that we have level playing field with all those applicants that we're interested in? They all take the same test. We can score it. Obviously, the tests become more complex if we're going from an AR person to a bookkeeper, to a full charge bookkeeper, to a controller, to a director of finance. There will be certain levels of assessment that'll need to happen. It gets more strategic as we move up the chain in that particular example. We should decide ahead of time and cement those things in place. They're not, hey, we should in the throes of hiring, but rather, we've already made these decisions. We've already decided that these are the needs, these are the wants, and here's how we're going to test for and check on these areas. That's a great set you up for success method. Handle the expectations of the role ahead of time before the need ever presents itself. We also have consideration about how we get these candidates, the sourcing of candidates. Where are they coming from? This too is something you can be proactive about, right? Decide ahead of time for your organization, where do we go to find people? If your current philosophy is sort of default, hey, we posted something on Indeed, we're a LinkedIn preferred member, and so all of our jobs go up on LinkedIn. They may be fine sources to do. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with them, but is that all you should be doing? Is it actually limiting the kinds of candidates that you might get to? So, here are some thoughts around searching. Yes, online is going to be the best place to start. But do some research ahead of time. Look at other organizations that are hiring for similar roles. What are they posting? Maybe you can also do some research on people. What kinds of people, what kinds of experience do those people have who are in roles similar to what we would need? Depending on the role, you may have quite a bit of information out there. So many folks are content-oriented. They are putting out articles. They're quoted in other publications. They blog. Whatever it might be, you could find out a lot of information about, oh, here's a success quotient that this person is sharing for how they've been able to be so successful in the role they have. Would that work for us? Is it the complete opposite for our kind of industry? Do your research ahead of time and then start to gather a candidate profile together so that you'll know what you're searching for and why. I certainly am not saying, again, not to market that way for open positions. Of course, post, I get it. But think too in marketing internally as well. How do we give our internal staff the opportunity to be viable for consideration for certain roles, or to make recommendations or referrals to other people? Some organizations do referral-based incentives. If you make a recommendation of an employee for a future employee, you may get some sort of compensation after X amount of time of their employment. That's great, fantastic. As an aside, let me be sure to mention, there are times that could be problematic if you're not paying attention to diversity and inclusion initiatives. Too many like me people may populate your place of employment, and besides the unintentional but potential anti-diversity initiative that could go on there, it also may keep others, those that aren't connected to current employees, from applying. We see this all the time with organizations that post all of their staff members or the primary leaders of certain departments on their websites. And if you start to look at those pictures, if a lot of people look the same, everyone is of a certain race, for example, will that potentially keep others from applying? Remember, they're doing research on you just as much as you desire to meet them and maybe do some research on the individuals after they apply and start the interview. They're already doing that, and it may keep them from even applying because they're looking on a website and saying, wow, everybody kind of looks the same, or it doesn't look like there's room for somebody like me to advance within this kind of organization. That's part of your marketing. How are we marketing to different people groups in different areas, in different economies? So posting carries a lot more weight to it than you may think. Popping something up on Indeed is really just not the best strategy alone. It's a piece of it, but it isn't it alone. Passive candidates are going to come through by your efforts. Of course, the active ones are coming, right? They're the ones applying and saying, I need you to pay attention to me. That's obvious. But the passive ones are the ones that didn't know they were looking until they heard from you. And that really comes out of the research that you've been doing. There's some great work out there done by quite a number of folks. I will make a recommendation if you don't follow or read the work from Jerry Crispin. Search for Jerry online. He has written volumes of stuff about Boolean searches and all other kinds of research-oriented tools that you could use for online sourcing of candidates, and then to be able to reach out to them and say, hey, we've got this great role that actually, we just posted or we haven't even posted for yet, but wanted to see if we could have a conversation with you about what we're looking for and why. Those calls sometimes are welcome. I know sometimes they're not, but you've got to be ready to do that ahead of the opening, right? This is proactive in consideration. What kind of constant searching am I doing? What is my constant candidate pool like for departments, for certain roles, that I know that I've got some great people that I've already done some research on that should we have an opening or a need, I'm not starting from scratch. I've already been keeping up on building a candidate pool ahead of time. Certainly you're going to post for that role again, and there's going to be active responses, but again, you're not starting from zero. That's really important. And sourcing is a beast in and of itself. If you've never done that kind of sourcing, there certainly are resources out there for you to use, and I'd encourage you to talk to some experts in that as well. The third area to mention is our interviewing consideration, right? We've got quite a bit that we've got to do better when it comes to interviewing. And a lot of it is being prepared ahead of time. For those of you who have great hiring managers who have personality and they can converse with, the fake plant in the corner of the lobby, they're just so, good and gregarious and entertaining, that's all well and good. But I would say that doesn't necessarily mean that that person is a great interviewer. They could be a great conversationalist. They could help someone to feel comfortable, but are they actually leading people into thoughtful responsiveness to the process of interview. Most of that is going to have to happen ahead of time, that you are training folks as to how to do a really good interview. And if no one is doing that, then it's a crapshoot. You continue to just sort of hope that someone's personality is going to win out. Well, that's not a great strategy. So, a couple of things that I have listed here are sort of a process of consideration. What's the greeting like as people come in for an interview? What's the greeting like when we get someone on the phone? Is it a canned speech? I'm not saying that's bad, but if it's a canned speech without emotion, is that the real right first impression you want to have? Hi, this is John Baldino. I'm giving you a call because you had applied online for an ad for our controller that you saw on Indeed. How you doing today? It becomes very static. There's not a lot of emotion to it. There doesn't seem to be any enthusiasm sometimes. Practice the greeting. Mix it up. Have 3 or 4 for your phone screening that you might be doing. Practice what the greeting should look like as someone arrives. Who are they seeing at first? How should those people respond? If the first person that someone sees when they come into your office is, let's say, the person at the front desk, which might make sense for some of your organizations, that person at the front desk should be involved in this interview training, even at the beginning pieces of it. It's a great identification of potential skills of that front desk person, but it also reminds the organization it's more than just one person making this impression. It's all of us. So what should the greeting be like? Should the receptionist get up and shake the hand of the candidate? Greet them warmly? Is it just a hi, yes, oh, you're here for, thank you, have a seat? That's like going to the doctor's office, and that's not a great connection for a lot of people. Right? Be thoughtful about the impression that you're giving. We do need to help people with questions, so practice this ahead of time. What are the kinds of questions that we should ask in an interview or at each stage of the process, whether phone screen, again, or in-person interview? What kinds of questions make sense at what time? And I'm talking even the basics as well. I have been a part of interview processes where I'm asked, and now this is, I know could be illegal in some places, but I'm just using it as a simple example. I'm asked 4 to 5 times in the process about the range of compensation I'm looking for. Well, if I answer that question the first time, why am I still answering it at the 4th iteration? What is happening with that information? Why are people not? It leads me to believe that the organization may not be very organized, that those involved in the interview process don't speak with one another. So even in this questioning phase, think about the internal communication structures that are going on. How do we share information with one another for those that are involved in the interviewing process? Decide ahead of time what those communication structures will be like. Is there a shared drive for this kind of information? Are we utilizing our applicant tracking system, our ATS, the way that we ought to for notes, for sharing of information with each person involved? And of course, collaborating on the kinds of questions to ask and when to ask those questions. Those of you who still ask questions that are, hey, I see here on your resume that, that your last position is a controller. Tell me about that. Well, that's so open-ended. Tell you about what? Yes, I am a controller and I'm looking to leave. What is it that you're asking? Right? If instead you want to say, I see here that your last position was as a controller and you were there for 2 years. Share with me a little bit what you changed in those 2 years that helped there to be a more efficient department. Or how did the systems that you put into place change the way in which accounts were brought up to date? And pick something more specific. It'll give you a better idea as to how people are able to think on the fly and it also gives a candidate the opportunity to brag on what they've been able to do. Oftentimes those questions, we expect a kind of response, and so if people go off script, even if it's not written, it's in our heads, that's troublesome to us. Well, look, this is an interview. We really want to hear from the whole person. You have a responsibility to describe the organization at the interview. I'm not saying that has to happen at each iteration, so it may not have to happen the same way at the phone screen as it does in the second or third interview, but decide ahead of time. Who's going to describe what? What are we going to highlight? Who is going to be the one that actually might do a tour of the facility with someone because there's a visual description that someone needs to see? When will they get introduced to other members of the department or division as part of the interview process? If you're dealing with something that's in manufacturing or distribution, something like that, do they get to go onto the main floor and see the equipment, look at process for him or herself? How is that going to happen? How are we allowing for description to occur throughout the process? Again, decide this ahead of time. Many of you on this call could probably, agree with what I'm about to say, but so much of this happens on the fly. We get to the third interview and someone's like, hey, have you seen such and such yet? Oh, no? Oh my gosh, I can't believe you haven't. Let's go do that. Why come across as if it's a surprise that we haven't planned for this? We should be thoughtful in that way. That's proactive. At the same time, we also need to make room for listening. You got to hear more than just the answers of the candidate that eventually comes in. Are you prepared to listen? Can you ask a question that's open-ended enough for someone to tell you a longer story? I know hiring managers that are convinced everything that they need to know they learn in the first 90 seconds of sitting with someone. Well, maybe. I can't say no to all of it, but I'm going to say I think sometimes we do a disservice to candidates because we have already sort of written them off or think they're wonderful before they really get to ever offer us a bulk information, stories, accounts of their success, accounts of their failures. So sit and listen. Ask questions that are going to make you uncomfortable. And here's what I mean. Candidate A, thank you again. Thanks for answering some of the questions that I've asked. Let me ask you and hear your thoughts. What do you know of this company? What do you think of this company? Did you do any research? And listen to what they say. Actually, yes, I did do some research. And while there were some very positive things out there, I did notice some negative things as well. Okay, such as what? Well, someone put on there X, Y, and Z. They start to describe a situation. Listen to them. Listen to the concerns that are connected to what they read. Try not to take a massively defensive posture in those moments. Share with them. Yeah, I unfortunately that was a situation that occurred. I don't know if it occurred to the degree to which it's been presented online, but we learned a lot from that situation. We learned that we weren't treating people based on their skill sets, but a little bit more on how they related to others. We're trying to fix some of that. We do need skilled persons. So to be able to sort of add that kind of, hey, mea culpa into your response is huge. But you've done that because you've listened to their concerns. You've listened to their asks. You've listened to their perspective. Now you're responding in a way that makes sense. Let me remind you, these are proactive considerations. We do need to help our folks learn how to respond. We have to help our staff learn how to respond. I have been in interviewing situations and listened to hiring managers say, oh, well, that's total crap. You can't believe what you read. I don't know if that's the best response. I'm not saying that it isn't true, but what I'm saying is there's a better way to answer. There's a more thoughtful way to answer, and we have to help our folks be ready to do so. And I know this may be funny, but we ought to teach people how to be thankful as well in the interview process. Even if we're not going to go forward with a particular candidate, how do we help people know how to not feel awkward about it? or to just settle into the awkwardness? When you need to tell someone that it may not be the right role for them, can you still at least thank them well through the process for participating, for their honesty? Maybe this isn't the right role for this person, but you'd like to stay in touch because there may be something else that comes up, and you mean that genuinely. How do you help people get through the awkwardness? Sometimes a consideration of gratitude helps people to sort of get through those emotions. Lean in on the gratitude piece rather than the awkwardness piece. And before I get to the following up part, I know that you see, if you're looking at the presentation to the far left, the setting makes a difference too. What kind of environment are you bringing the person into? Decide ahead of time where each segment of the interview will take place and where people will sit. If a lot of the interviews are done in offices and someone is sitting on the opposite side of a desk, does that present too much of an authoritarian stance to the interview? Does it give someone a reason to believe that you're cold, unapproachable, that the organization is very systemic and unfeeling? The visual cues will matter. So what is the setting like? The room, how people will sit, the temperature, if there's going to be beverages available, obviously pointing out the restrooms, all of those kinds of things environmentally matter as well. So be thoughtful about setting and decide ahead of time. I'd also recommend not doing it in the same room every time at each component of the interview. If they're going to meet with 2 people in one day, change rooms. If they're coming back for subsequent interviews, use different rooms. If you are interviewing people and you are very small, you're a startup, and you're in a shared cooperative office space, a WeWork and the like, all right, even there, just use a different room. Or meet someone sometimes off-site. Do the coffee shop, do a restaurant, do somewhere that's public but safe, right? If that's helpful to this particular process, but decide on those things ahead of time. People should almost have a process map for all of the components in the hiring process. They have a general framework of where they're going, and then specifics under each category. And then following up again, it is unacceptable for us to fall apart here. The ghosting of candidates is huge today. And that also is a deterrent for those that may actively apply to an open role, because they're seeing the responses that other people have to what it was like for them as they went through the interview process. Yeah, they were all over me. They gave me 3 interviews in a week and a half, and then I never heard from them. Even on the application side, if it's just an initial application, respond. And I might even make the recommendation, which might really upset some of you. If you have an auto response, that's fine, but that auto response should be something that someone could reply to. Not please don't respond to this email, or this email, if you respond to, will not be seen by anyone. That seems really cold. And I get it if you're a large organization, and if one of my friends from Comcast is on this call, I'm sorry, I understand that. But there ought to be an outlet for someone to be able to be expressive, to share feedback. That may be the only way that they can do it, and it's a much safer way for there to be one email going from that candidate back to someone on the hiring process, rather than not having an outlet that way and running online and posting something somewhere. You need to scan that social media. You're scanning it, going back to what we talked about for sourcing, but you also need to scan it to see what's out there and how does it speak to the follow-up that the organization's doing. Have a plan. What does follow-up look like? What's appropriate? What's appropriate at what level of the process? Do we do the same thing for first round dismissals as we do for third round dismissals? Maybe not. But have that outlined ahead of time. And I know this is a lot of information, particularly on the interview prep standpoint, but if you want to do it well, it takes plan planning and practice. It takes planning and practice. And that has to be something that an organization commits to. None of this happens by accident. It is all thoughtful. And I know that Matt had mentioned at the beginning of this webinar that there may be some questions that you would have, and so there may be some things in the chat box or have come in differently. So let me just take a few minutes here before we move to wrap up to see if there's any questions that we could take now. Matt, anything come through?
No, I have a question here.
Okay.
On the slide regarding expectations and needs, how can an employer be proactive in identifying what that need is and when there is a need for a new role or to bring on a new team member?
That's a great question. So again, back to, let's see if I can head back just to get to that. There we go. Back to expectations again. I'll start with one consideration, and then Matt, if I should go a little deeper, let me know. But roles do change. And so if someone if we've got a great department where retention is really good, people don't leave, they really enjoy it. And let's say the average tenure in a particular department is 5 to 7 years. And we've not really done very much in terms of identifying any differences in the role, because people are in there, they're collaborative, they're innovative, things are happening, it's going well. And for whatever reason, someone has to move on. Let's just say, right? Their relocation, something happens. It does provide a responsive, reactive time to look at the role itself, and that often is what happens for organizations when there has been consistency, particularly in a department. So I don't want to poo-poo that and say that sometimes there aren't benefits to the responsive or reactive position. But what I'd say on a proactive standpoint is, if you're doing at least annualized job description review, talk to the folks that are currently in the role. Let them look at the job description with you every year. Does this still seem to fit? If not, why not? Are there things that we have listed here as a need that actually aren't really a need anymore? Or they're not a need, they're a want. I know that the organization says they need these things, but we aren't applying that. And so let's move this perceived need back into the want column. And maybe plan accordingly. Maybe we plan to say this role isn't going to be the role where that want makes sense. Instead, we may need to create a new role, or it's a leveling of the role. Until you get to a level 2 or a level 3, then that want becomes a need, and scale it accordingly. A lot of organizations have great aspirations. They want to be something of some sort. Good things. I'm not saying in a bad way. They want to be, the subject matter expert on X. They want to be seen as the organization that everybody goes to for Y. Whatever it is, that's great aspiration. Do you have the infrastructure in your people to be able to support those aspirations? If you're not sure, look at the values, look at your mission from an organizational standpoint. How does that translate into each of the roles that are in existence currently? And where do we see the gaps? That kind of gap analysis takes a little bit of work. It's a little bit of a heavy lift to sort of look through what those skill sets might need to be. What kind of knowledge do we need? And quite honestly, can we pay for it? Can we afford it? So a company that has aspirations of something that their finances will not let them get to, and we don't think that the finances are going to let us get to that for another 5 years or so, constantly dangling that carrot out could become frustrating rather than inspiring. So you have to take that time to do that kind of gap analysis to see where those pitfalls might be.
Great. Thanks, John. Another one was when considering younger hires, with a higher turnover rate,
Yep.
what would you say would be a number one practice or a system an employer can put in place to keeping the younger hires around for a long haul?
Right. So, and I'm going to younger by age, right? Is that what we're talking about, right? So I'm not going to say the word because I don't believe in all this generational stuff. I mean, I know it's real, but I don't ascribe as much credit to it as some people do. All right, so right now, actually the last survey that just came out actually puts how long someone stays at a current job down to 18 months. That's what one survey just recently put out to say is the new average. I don't know if I'm believing all the way down to 18 months, but the highest tier of that in some of the surveys are about 3.5 years. So call it 1.5 to 3.5 years. Somewhere in that range is where the average person is in terms of tenure. So how do we keep people? We use a lot of employee engagement verbiage for that, right? If we can keep people engaged, then they won't leave. Well, I will tell you as well, the statistics on highly engaged employees, their tenure on average is just under 7 years. So what is that about? I don't think there's anything that's foolproof, but what I would say is be thoughtful about a couple of things. Number one, learning management. What are you doing in your organization proactively to prep people to learn new skills, base knowledge, aptitudes, application of knowledge? What are you doing there? Folks want to learn. It is not just to promote. And I think that's a bit of a misnomer today. We tease to say the 25-year-old who starts in your organization is trying to figure out how to be CEO in 2 years. I think the title really is more about validation of having learned something. So how do you invest in people to learn and to grow? Learning management is a huge piece to answering that question about keeping people, about retention. The other piece, quite honestly, has everything to do with expectations. What did you sell them when they first started? So often folks will say 6 months in, this is nothing like what I was told at the interview. I was promised X, Y, and Z. Why did we promise them that? Who told them that? Right? That's why keeping people accountable to the hiring process ahead of time. What have we all decided upon? What's our messaging in this? That's huge. And it keeps people from feeling like they were duped. That this organization presented itself to be something like this, but in actuality, it's nothing like it. And I can't stay. I'm wasting my time. I would say the other piece to be thoughtful of in that is as soon as you hear someone say, I thought it was going to be different, something like that, I was promised this, whatever it might be, as soon as you hear it, don't ignore it. Address it right away. Try to course correct with the person. Great?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So, thank you again, everyone, for the time you spent today on this webinar with HIG Academy. Appreciate HIG having me on today to do the first of the webinar series. Appreciate it, Matt. Thank you so much as well for your help today. If there are ways in which HIG can be helpful, please make sure you reach out to them here. If there's anything that Humareso might be able to support as well, you see my contact info here as well. Please feel free to reach out.
And we will be emailing this webinar. We did record it, so we're going to email that to everyone in attendance as well.
Great. Thank you again, everyone. Have a great day.